Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Bible Study Wednesday. We are in the final chapter of the book of 1 Kings, but we're not actually going to finish 1 Kings today. Here's why. The story that we follow in the chapter, it ends kind of at verse 40, and so it doesn't really make sense to finish the book. The book and its division with 2 Kings is arbitrary, wasn't something that was done by the writers or the editors or the redactors or whatever. It was done by much later people who didn't want to make it all one book because it was too big of a scroll, I guess. So, so the end of the chapter belongs really with the first chapter of 2 Kings. So we're not actually going to finish 1 Kings today, but we are in the final chapter. So 1 Kings chapter 22, we are still dealing with the kingship of, King Ahab. We've been told that he wasn't a great king. No, we've been told worse. We were told that he was a horrible king. Our narrator has really spent a lot of time on King Ahab. I mean, if you look back, chapters 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and now 22. He does die in this chapter, okay? But a lot of energy is going into King Ahab. And you know what? It probably has a lot to do with his source material. I don't think he's necessarily interested in Ahab all that much. It just so happens that that's what he had to work with, if you know what I'm saying. That's what he had to work with. So, all right, let's get it all in there. And so in chapter 22, it kind of feels like it follows on chapter 20. 21, which is what we talked about last week, where it started out with later the following events took place, and that we had Naboth and the vineyard, and it was a nice story that was very self-contained, but it seems as though it was placed where it was intentionally, because he didn't know where else to put that story, because this story, the one we have today, is where he dies. Okay. Here we go. Chapter 22. For 3 years, this is verse 1 of chapter 22 of 1 Kings. For 3 years, Aram and Israel continued without war. If you recall, chapter 20 was about Ahab, the king of Israel, forming an alliance with the king of Aram. Remember Ben-Hadad and all of that? Well, it seems to have worked in that they continued without war, as the opening verse of chapter 22 says. Verse 2, but in the third year of King Jehoshaphat of Judah, in the third year, that's the third year of their peace, or of their peace with Aram. But in the third year, King Jehoshaphat of Judah came down to the king of Israel. Oh, we haven't heard about a king of Judah in a super duper duper long time. We were told that King Jehoshaphat acceded, took the throne of Judah a long time ago, like back in, I don't know, it's like chapter 15 or so. But we haven't had any interaction with him. Well, this is the first mention of him in a long time, and his appearance is somewhat makes him look as though he's a bit of a vassal, V-A-S-S-A-L, a bit of a vassal to Ahab. Why does it seem like he's a vassal? Because of the kind of interaction that they have. Notice it says that he came down to the king of Israel. Remember, if you're in Judah, and you're the king, you're in Jerusalem. It doesn't matter which direction you're going from Jerusalem. If you're leaving Jerusalem, you're going down. You're going down, okay? Doesn't matter, north, south, east, or west. If you leave Jerusalem, you're going down. Look at this. But in the third year, King Jehoshaphat of Judah came down to the king of Israel. They are talking in terms of elevation. That's just the way that was. When you leave Jerusalem, you're going down. It's kind of like, well, it's not exactly like that. But I was thinking like here in Phoenix, right, in the valley, when you leave here, you really are going up pretty much everywhere because, except for east-west, but yeah, you are going, and there's an elevation, but you really are going up out of Phoenix, especially if you go north, you're going up. But you go south, you're going up, you go east, west, so yeah, sure, that plays here too. It's just that we have to go up to leave Phoenix, not down to leave Jerusalem. Okay, verse 3. The king of Israel said to his servants, do you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, yet we are doing nothing to take it out of the hand of the king of Aram? You might be asking yourself, what is Ramoth Gilead? It's a border town. It's in the Transjordan. What does that mean? It means it's on the other side of the Jordan. It's on the east side of the Jordan. Israel proper was on the west side of the Jordan. And this border town is one that he's noticing, hey, why don't we take that back? That might be strategically advantageous. Well, look at this. Verse 4. He said to Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to battle at Ramoth Gilead? It's stated like an invitation, but with the way Jehoshaphat replies, it's like, how could he say no? Look at this. Jehoshaphat replied to the king of Israel, I am as you are. My people are your people. My horses are your horses. He seems very eager. Maybe Ahab's kingship, and history kind of bears this out if you actually look historically at the kingship of Ahab. He was he had something going on. He had some power. So it may be that he was more powerful than the king of Judah at this time, and that the king of Judah was a bit of a vassal to Ahab at Israel. It's very possible. Certainly it's indicative in what he's saying. Verse 5, but Jehoshaphat also said to the king of Israel, inquire first for the word of the Lord. Remember how these writings are called the former prophets? One theory of the reason why they're called the former prophets is because there's a lot of contacting prophets, seeking the words of prophets, seeing the word of prophets being carried out, but yet it's not a book of a prophet. When we talk about the latter prophets, those are the books that bear the names of prophets: Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Micah, Amos, Obadiah, Zechariah, Zephaniah, all of those. Okay, so he wants to seek a word of the Lord. Well, this is not an attempt, I don't know, maybe it is. Maybe it is an attempt by our narrator to say like, wow, we know Ahab's not going to look for a word from the Lord because he's such a bad king. He's just let Jezebel rule and all of that stuff. So when Jehoshaphat says, let's inquire first for the word of the Lord, let's look at how Ahab responds in verse 6. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 of them, and said to them, it was not uncommon for kings to consult prophets before going into battle. And there's a lot of prophets that were court prophets, C-O-U-R-T, court prophets, which means that they basically were on the payroll. They were intended to be sycophants, fig lickers. Yeah, people who were yes men, if you will, to the king, to give him a favorable word, to make him think that what he's saying is true. And so there was a lot of that going on. We see that in the book of Jeremiah. One of the things that Jeremiah had struggled with was the fact that he dared to say the truth. Frequently, these court prophets would not give the truth because they knew where their bread was buttered. Let's see what they say. Shall I go to battle against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? They said, go up, for the Lord will give it into the hand of the king. But Jehoshaphat said, is there no other prophet of the Lord here of whom we may inquire? Jehoshaphat is probably a little wise to the fact that, these guys sound like they're really just kind of giving us what the answer that we were looking for. Maybe we should dig deeper. Verse 8, the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, there is still one other by whom we may inquire of the Lord, Micaiah, son of Imlah. Get this. But I hate him, for he never prophesies anything favorable about me, but only disaster. Hence the reason why he's not amongst these 400 court prophets. He's an outlier, and he dares to tell the truth. Ahab doesn't want to hear the truth. He wants to hear what he wants to hear. And wow, Jehoshaphat responds. Jehoshaphat said, well, let the king not say such a thing. Don't be so hard on him, okay? Let's give him a shot. Verse 9, then the king of Israel summoned an officer and said, bring quickly Micaiah, son of Imlah. Now, the king of Israel and King Jehoshaphat of Judah were sitting on their thrones, arrayed in their robes at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria. Remember, Samaria is that city that was the capital of the northern kingdom. And all the prophets were prophesying before them. So they had said, so they're basically, it's setting the scene for Micaiah's arrival. And this Micaiah is not necessarily Micah. Is it possible it could be that prophet Micah, of the book that bears his name? It's possible, not probable, not likely, not impossible, but their names aren't the same. We don't have the same parentage, so no, probably not. Verse 11, Zedekiah, son of Chenaanah, see that, Chenaanah, that's what you do when you have two A's next to each other. You say one of them and you put a glottal stop between Chenaanah, made for himself horns of iron, and he said, thus says the Lord, with these you shall gore the Arameans until they are destroyed. Zedekiah was one of the court prophets, and this is just like an example of the kind of yes men that they were, saying that reinforcing the positive word they gave, and now they're really being dramatic about it. Verse 11, all the prophets were prophesying the same and saying, go up to Ramoth Gilead and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. Okay, the scene is set. Now look, verse 13. The messengers who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, to Micaiah, scene shifts to not Samaria, to where Micaiah is. Look, the words of the prophets with one accord are favorable to the king. Let your word be like the word of one of them and speak favorably. So they are asking Micaiah to be a part of a ruse, if you will, to that they're playing on the king, because they know that's not really a word of the Lord. It's something that they are trying to just all be in cahoots about. They want Micaiah to also be in cahoots. That's not a city in Israel, cahoots. No, it's just, yeah, you get it, right? Verse 14, but Micaiah said, as the Lord lives, whatever the Lord says to me, that I will speak. Oh, Micaiah. Oh, isn't that just a wonderful, wonderful thing to say? It's like, oh, far be it from me to lie. I must tell the truth and only the truth. So whatever you have me say, I will not do it. I will only say what the Lord tells me to say. Okay, fine. Let's see how that goes. Verse 15. When he had come to the king said to him, okay, so the scene shifts. Micaiah is now in front of Ahab and Jehoshaphat. Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? He answered him, go up and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. Oh, that's interesting. Micaiah seems to be going along with the ruse. Verse 16. But the king said to him, how many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? So when Ahab hears this word that Micaiah is giving him, he has an inkling that, wait a second, this doesn't sound like what he's really supposed to say. It sounds like he's actually going along with the others. So he says this, really? Really? You're going to do this to me? You're going to play that card, are you? Verse 17. Then Micaiah said, what we're going to find out here is that Micaiah was just blowing sunshine up his skirt. Yeah. Then Micaiah said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let each one go home in peace. What does that mean? It's a vision of the death of Ahab. How do we get the death of Ahab out of this? We get the death of Ahab out of this because the word shepherd is a euphemism for the king. The kings were considered to be the shepherds of the people. This vision that he has, it's a metaphorical type of thing, basically saying that he's going to go into battle and he's going to lose and he's going to die. Verse 18. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you? So after he says this, you can picture, so Ahab and Jehoshaphat are sitting there, remember their thrones and all of that. And he turns to Jehoshaphat and says, didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you? This guy never says, did I not tell you that he would not prophesy anything favorable about me, but only disaster? So he's saying basically, now that's what I expected this guy to say, Jehoshaphat. That's what I expected him to say. That first thing he said, he just did that to build up my, my hopes. He tried to get me. What? Oh, you're not going to get me on this one. Yeah. Verse 19. Then Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing beside him to the right and to the left of him. He's got a little vision here of the council, the overall council of the Lord, the heavenly council. What's the heavenly council exactly? The heavenly council is that picture that they all had that of what was actually going on out in the heavens. God with the heavenly hosts and the people around him, who were not angels necessarily. You see, they saw Yahweh as the heavenly warrior. And the heavenly hosts are like his army, if you will. There were people, they weren't all yes people. They were all, just because they were in the heavenly host doesn't mean they were necessarily all, good. That's just the way they saw that. And so so Micaiah is now describing a vision of that, and he's kind of explaining for why he said what he had said earlier about victory when he didn't mean it. Listen. So they have their lesson right. Verse 20. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab so that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? Oh, that's interesting. So he's basically saying to Ahab that, well, God planned it this way, that you would be deceived to go to Ramoth Gilead. Then one said one thing, and another said another. So this is still a picture of that heavenly council. Until a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. How? The Lord asked him. He replied, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. So what Micaiah is doing is giving an overall picture of why the court prophets would give the word that they had given. They're basically saying, oh, this is all a part of God's ruse anyway, because you kind of you wanted to hear that anyway. You wouldn't take the truth anyway. So we're just going to give you the lie. And so look at this. I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. Then the Lord said, you are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do it. So in this vision, he is seeing that God is the Lord of history, and that Jehoshaphat and Ahab is going to go out to war. He is going to lose. And it's not going to be, it kind of like takes the blame, if you will, off of the court prophets. And it basically shows the Lord of Israel, and this is the solid truth of it all, a little bit of a trickster. That's the nature of our legendary tales that we have in Scripture. Not the first time that's happened. The stories of Yahweh can sometimes be a little like, really? That's interesting. Got to remember, a lot of what we got here in the Old Testament are perceptions of the way God was. And that's what we're supposed to get from it. We all have a lot of crazy ideas of how God is and how God isn't. This is one such example. Verse 23. So, okay, then Lord said, you are to entice him, you shall succeed. Go out and do it. 23. So you see, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. The Lord has decreed disaster for you. This is Micaiah saying, okay, the whole balloon is popped. Let me give you the big picture of what's happened here. And he does convey the true word. Verse 24. Then Zedekiah, remember Zedekiah? He was the one saying, being real dramatic about the horns. Horns, you remember he said horns of iron and all of that? He says, made for himself horns of iron, and said, with these you shall gore the Arameans until they are destroyed. Real super dramatic. Horn, anytime you horns are like power. Then Zedekiah, son of Chenaanah, came up to Micaiah, get this, slapped him on the cheek and said, which way did the Spirit of the Lord pass from me to speak to you? I just think this is glorious. Really? You're talking for God now? I don't recall seeing him leave me to go to you. Verse 25, Micaiah replied, you will find out on that day when you go in to hide in an inner chamber. Bum, bum, bum. It's all going to be known at some point. You're going to be hiding away. Verse 26, the king of Israel then ordered, take Micaiah and return him to Ammon, the governor of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, thus says the king, put this fellow in prison and feed him on reduced rations of bread and water until I come in peace. So Micaiah is jailed up for telling the truth. This is also behavior that is consistent with true prophets, aka, or reference to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, same thing happens to him for telling the truth. Verse 28. Bread and water. Verse 28. Micaiah said, if you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me. He's basically saying that you're gonna die, and if you don't die, then I'm a false prophet. That's how much. He doubles down on the word that he received. I love it. Verse 28, Micaiah said, if you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken to me. And he said, hear you peoples, all of you. Bum, bum, bum. This is the big word of Micaiah. That might be the last we actually hear of him. Isn't it interesting? If you think about it, why don't we hear anything? There's no Elijah here. We had a lot of Elijah earlier. Ahab didn't like Elijah either. Remember, he called him the troubler of Israel. But no, this is not a part of that Elijah cycle of stories that we had back in verses 17, 18, 19. In chapter 17, 18, 19. Verse 28. So the king of Israel and King Jehoshaphat of Judah went up to Ramoth Gilead on their little war campaign. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into battle, but you wear the robes. This is a noted ploy that is used in battle. Back when kings would go to battle, sometimes they would disguise themselves as somebody not the king, because everybody's going after the king, so they're going to try to not be the king. No, you don't want to go into battle with a bullseye painted on your chest. This is what we have going on. So the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. Now the king of Aram had commanded the 32 captains of his chariots, fight with no one, small or great, but only with the king of Israel. It's like, we want that guy. Don't waste your energy on the piddly ants. We want Ahab. Verse 32. When the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, it is surely the king of Israel. So they turned to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out. Verse 33. When the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. So the ruse is busted. Verse 34. But a certain man, look at this. Verse 34, but a certain man drew his bow and unknowingly struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate. And so he said to the driver of his chariot, so this is basically a haphazard arrow. What's going to happen here is the prophetic word is going to be fulfilled. What God said was going to happen is going to happen. The Lord of history is still the Lord of history. And notice there's no building up of this person because we don't have their name. Unknowingly, just a haphazard flinging an arrow and it strikes him. This is it's talking about Ahab. Turn around. This is Ahab speaking. Turn around and carry me out of the battle, for I am wounded. Verse 35. The battle grew hot that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot facing the Arameans until at evening he died. The blood from the wound had flowed into the bottom of the chariot. The propping up of the king. Again, following with that ruse motif, if you will. Verse 36, then about evening, a shout went through the army. Every man to his city and every man to his country. It means the battle's over. And they're saying, okay, we won. Let's call it a day. Verse 37. So the king died and was brought to Samaria. They buried the king in Samaria. Look at this, verse 38. They washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria. The dogs licked up his blood. Now Elijah already had said that this was going to happen. That's how he was going to die. That in his dying, dogs would be licking up his blood, which meant he would die in the city. Remember, if the dogs are licking your blood, you're in the city. If it's the birds, that's out in the country. That's just the way that was. Okay. Oh, look at this. The dogs licked up his blood, and the prostitutes washed themselves in it, according to the word of the Lord that he had spoken. That who had spoken? We hadn't heard this word of the Lord about the prostitutes washing themselves in it. Very curious, this phrase. It's interesting that in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of scripture here doesn't have this, but it does in the Hebrew. Yeah. What this is about, though, is describing the what am I trying to say? Describing the depth of the scandal, if you will. Remember, to die with the dogs licking up your blood is an inglorious death. And they're basically saying, adding insult to injury. Yes, this is not a good depiction of women, because really, what's wrong with prostitutes? But in the narrative economy of our Deuteronomistic theologian, who is our narrator, they are bad, and so to say this thing about them washing themselves in it, his blood, is adding insult to injury. Okay, there you have it. According to the word of verse 39, now the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did. Oh, now we're going into a very, this is the boilerplate kind of stuff with regard to the book of Kings. When you close the book on one king and open on the next one, this is what you say. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did, and the ivory house that he built, and all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? I think this is a wonderful, wonderfully instructive boilerplate thing, because it's scripture basically telling us, hey, we're not telling you everything here. We're giving you a specific viewpoint, a specific understanding. We're giving you a theological understanding. We're not giving you history. We're giving you the stories and the interpretation with regard to the rule of the Deuteronomic law. He's not even pretending to say, oh yeah, I'm trying to give you an account here of everything. No, not trying to do that at all. If you want to read that, go to the library, and here's the book. Here's the Dewey Decimal Reference number, whatever. Verse 40, so Ahab slept with his ancestors. That means that he was buried with his family plot, or in his family plot. That's a euphemism for to say that. When you just to sleep with the ancestors, like if you didn't get buried in the family plot, then you're not sleeping with the ancestors, right? Okay. And his son Ahaziah succeeded him. That's where we're ending. Next week, we're going to start in verse 41 and go through the first chapter of 2 Kings, and that will be our foray into the final book of the Deuteronomistic historians' narrative that started in Deuteronomy, and it continued in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. There's a lot that can be said about all of this. Remember, we always expected Ahab to die an inglorious death. We were already told that that was going to happen. But it does give us some insight into how powerful leaders will try and kid themselves. How they will, they're willing to surround themselves with people who just tell them what they want to hear. And the only thing that's important is, are they loyal to me? Yes, that might sound familiar. This is the way that kind of mindset works. It's not dead. That mindset still lives. So keep that in mind as we move forward. But yeah, I don't really have much more to say about that. So until next time, keep reading those stories. Peace.